you've been led to believe about the Sabbath might only be half the truth. For generations, we have viewed it through the lens of a rigid religious Code law born at Mount Sinai and reserved exclusively for the Jewish people. But the reality is far more ancient and far more provocative. The true story begins not in the desert of Exodus, but in the profound, untouched silence of Eden. Picture the first full day of human existence. Adam opens his eyes not to the demands of labor or the burden of survival, but to an atmosphere of absolute rest personally sanctified by the Creator. In this moment, there were no temples, no rituals, and no sin. Adam and Eve were neither Jews nor Israelites. They were simply humanity in its purest original form. The shocking truth is, the Sabbath was never meant to be a religious institution. It was a manifesto of freedom, woven into the very DNA of creation. If this sacred rest existed before sin ever entered the world, why have we spent centuries labeling it a religious burden? Perhaps the Sabbath isn't a law we are forced to keep, but a forgotten blueprint of who we were always meant to be. Imagine the first morning of human existence. As the shadows of the first Friday recede, the golden dawn of the seventh day breaks over the untouched landscape of Eden. Adam opens his eyes to his first full day of life, but he finds no list of chores, no demands for labor, and no burden of survival. Instead, he encounters a profound divine silence. Most of us have been taught that the Sabbath is a rigid religious obligation, a set of rules carved in stone at Mount Sinai, exclusively for the Jewish people. But the reality is far more ancient and provocative. The Sabbath existed millennia before the first nation was ever born, and before a single sin was ever committed. In the opening chapters of Genesis, God issues direct commands for almost everything: what to eat, how to manage the earth, and how to name the creatures. Yet, when it comes to the Sabbath, there is a powerful silence. God does not issue a command, he performs an act of sanctification. In the original Hebrew, this word kadosh signifies more than just a ritual. It represents the establishment of a different order of reality. The Sabbath was not placed in the category of rules to be obeyed by the human will. It was woven into the very fabric of the universe. You do not command a bird to belong to the sky, or a heartbeat to follow a rhythm. It is simply part of their nature. In the same way, the Sabbath was built into the structure of the world as a sanctuary in time. This brings us to a striking paradox that challenges everything about our modern culture. Our world operates on a cold logic: you must work to deserve rest. We are told that our value is tied to our productivity, and that peace is a reward for our exhaustion. But look at Adam. He was created at the very end of the sixth day, meaning his first full experience of being human was a day of rest. He had not tilled the soil, he had not harvested a single fruit, and he had not yet proven his worth through labor. He started his life with rest. This is a theological revolution. It is a manifesto declaring that your value does not come from your performance, but from your presence. In God's original blueprint, the order is rest, then communion, and only then labor. You were deemed worthy before you ever did a single thing. Today we wear busyness like a badge of honor, but we are often living against our own divine DNA. If the Sabbath was meant to be as natural as a breath in Eden, why did it eventually have to become a heavy law at Sinai? Perhaps we are spending our entire lives trying to earn a freedom that was already given to us as a gift at the very beginning of time. As we decode this mystery, we find that the Sabbath is not a religious burden we are forced to carry, but a forgotten piece of paradise, a reminder of who we were always meant to be. Before the world told us we had to earn our right to exist. Most people view Mount Sinai and the stone tablets of Moses as the definitive starting point of the Sabbath. However, through a critical theological lens, Sinai was not where the Sabbath was born. It was where the Sabbath was rescued. In the original setting of Eden, There were no stone tablets or carved commands. This is because laws are only necessary when a relationship is fractured. You do not need a rule book for a family that loves each other instinctively. After centuries of slavery and the heavy toll of existence, humanity had grown stone-deaf to the original rhythm of the universe. They had forgotten how to be free. Sinai, therefore, was a form of spiritual first aid. It was a respirator for a dying memory. Just as a patient whose lungs have failed needs a machine to breathe for them, a humanity that had lost its spiritual instincts needed a law to sustain them. This does not mean the law is an enemy of grace. Rather, it is a sign that grace was once our natural state. Sinai is a melancholic reminder. It exists only because we forgot the heartbeat of Eden. To understand how this divine rhythm evolved into a rigid ritual, we must look at the symbol of a wedding ring. A ring is a sacred visible sign of a covenant, and it is to be deeply cherished. But ask yourself, does the love begin when the ring is put on, or is the ring simply a confirmation of a love that already exists? The danger is never in the ritual itself, but in the moment we mistake the ring for the marriage. Forms are essential, but they become hollow when they are severed from the life source that birthed them. The Sabbath at Sinai was the ring God gave to ensure that the original love of creation would never be entirely forgotten. This raises a provocative question. If the Sabbath is a universal human need, why has it been treated as the exclusive property of a single group? The foundation of the Sabbath was laid on the seventh day of creation long before any religion, nation, or border ever existed. It was always intended as a shared heritage for all mankind. The shift toward exclusivity often stems not from malice, but from fear. When something provides order and identity, humanity has a natural tendency to build fences around it to protect its meaning. In doing so, we turned a cathedral in time, open to every soul, into a private room for those who keep the rules. When the respirator of the law is mistaken for the act of breathing itself, we find ourselves exhausted even while performing our rituals of rest. We are holding on to the machine, yet we have forgotten how to HT the atmosphere of Eden. This loss is not just a religious technicality, it is a spiritual tragedy that defines our modern era. Imagine the most tragic moment in human history. Adam and Eve taking their heavy first steps away from Eden. As the gates slam shut behind them, the cherubim appear with flaming swords to blockade every path back to the tree of life. In an instant, the physical space of paradise became a forbidden zone. However, through a profound theological lens, we realize there was one thing the fire could not burn, and the swords could not block the seventh day. In the biblical order of reality, before God ever established a holy place, He established holy time. God did not keep Eden locked in a single location. He distributed fragments of it into the very rhythm of our weeks. The Sabbath is the only relic of paradise that survived the fallen sanctuary in time that remains accessible to every soul, no matter how broken the world around us becomes. If Adam and Eve kept the Sabbath in their state of perfection, then for us, this day is more than just a break from a stressful week. It is a factory reset for our divine DNA. We often treat the Sabbath as a way to repair the damage of our labor, but its true purpose is much deeper. It is an eschatological foretaste, a small sample of the future restoration. It does not simply look back to a lost past. It looks forward to a promised future where all things are made right. On this day, we are invited to taste the order of creation as it was meant to be, where our value is not measured by what we produce, but by the simple fact that we belong to the Creator. This truth hits home when we look at the modern struggle of the American spirit. Consider the image of a hard-working father who grinds 80 hours a week to give his family everything they desire. He is an excellent provider, ensuring his children have the best home and the best opportunities. Yet even when he is standing right in front of them, his mind is miles away, buried in emails and performance metrics. This man is not a villain. He is a victim of a culture that worships productivity. He has mastered the art of providing, but he has forgotten the art of being present. This is exactly how we treat the Sabbath when we reduce it to a religious rule. We keep the day with our rituals, but our hearts remain at work. The Sabbath does not exist to condemn our busyness. It exists to invite us to drop the heavy mask of the machine and return to the freedom of being human. As we look at this journey from the first breath of Adam to our own hurried lives today, the Sabbath remains a patient invitation. It asks us to choose between two ways of existing. Are you keeping the Sabbath as a religious debt you must pay to satisfy a distant God? Or are you stepping into it as a liberated soul, walking once again through the open gates of a garden that time forgot? The answer to that question determines whether you are merely observing a day or truly inheriting the last remaining piece of Eden. So in the end, did Adam and Eve keep the Sabbath? The answer doesn't lie in the ink of ancient manuscripts, but in the very essence of existence. They didn't keep the Sabbath as a religious obligation. They lived in it. The Sabbath didn't begin in a grand temple or with a law carved in cold stone. It began in the warmth of Eden, where humanity learned to rest with God before they ever learned to work for Him. We live in an age of exhaustion, where productivity is worshipped as a modern god, and we have turned ourselves into machines racing against time. We think we are progressing by shedding the ancient restraints of the past, but in reality we have severed ourselves from the divine biological rhythm God established for Adam at the very beginning. Perhaps the real question for us today isn't, are we keeping the Sabbath right, but rather, are we still letting God teach us how to rest? In a world obsessed with performance, returning to the primordial Sabbath is the most radical act of faith you can take. If the Sabbath is truly the last remaining fragment of paradise on this earth, are you standing outside its gates simply because you think it's a religion that doesn't belong to you? Don't just listen, reflect, because the Sabbath is not a burden to carry. It is a sanctuary where you find your soul again. If you feel the heartbeat of Eden in these words, hit subscribe and join me as we journey back through time to uncover the truths that were meant to be found. We aren't just searching for history, we are searching for life.